My name is Gloria Martinez, and the night my husband destroyed my life, I was celebrating what I thought was our greatest triumph together. 15 years of research, countless sleepless nights, and breakthrough after breakthrough had finally led to this moment. We had developed what could be the most revolutionary cancer treatment in human history. I was holding the final lab results in my trembling hands, tears of joy streaming down my face as I called out to David. "We did it," I whispered into the silence of our home laboratory. "Why actually did it?" What I didn't know was that David had been planning to steal everything from me for months. And in less than 24 hours, I would discover that the man I had loved and trusted for 12 years saw me not as his brilliant wife and research partner, but as an obstacle to his own glory. But David made one crucial mistake. He forgot that I wasn't just a scientist, I was a paranoid scientist. And paranoid scientists always have backup plans. Before I tell you exactly how I turned David from a celebrated hero into a federal prisoner using nothing but a safety deposit box key and 5 minutes of testimony, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I want to see how far this story of justice travels. The beginning of our love story reads like a fairy tale. I was a 26-year-old postdoctoral researcher at Johns Hopkins, already showing promise that made my professors whisper about Nobel Prizes. David was the charming pharmaceutical entrepreneur who walked into my lab one day with a business proposal and left with my heart. He wasn't a scientist himself, but he understood the business side of medicine in ways that fascinated me. While I could create compounds that could save lives, he knew how to get them to the people who needed them. We were perfect partners, in love and in ambition. "You're the genius, Gloria," he used to say, kissing my forehead as I worked late into the night. "I'm just the guy who makes sure the world gets to benefit from your brilliance." We married 2 years later in a small ceremony surrounded by colleagues, who joked that our wedding vows included promises to honor, cherish and patent together. David started Biolux Pharmaceuticals with his family money, and I became his head of research and development. We were building something beautiful together, or so I thought. For 15 years, I poured my soul into developing what we named Compound 47. It started as a theoretical approach to targeting cancer stem cells, the stubborn cells that conventional treatments couldn't touch. While other researchers chased incremental improvements to existing therapies, I was hunting for something revolutionary. The work was brutal. 12-hour days were normal, 18-hour days were common. David handled the business operations while I lived in the lab, surrounded by cell cultures, spectrometers, and endless notebooks filled with my handwriting. Every failed experiment felt personal. Every small breakthrough felt like climbing Everest. I remember the night everything clicked. It was 20:30 a.m. on a Tuesday in March, and I was running yet another assay when I saw something that made my heart stop. The cancer cells weren't just dying, they were being systematically eliminated in a way I had never seen before. Compound 47 wasn't just effective. It was miraculous. I ran home at 3 in the morning, bursting through our bedroom door like a madwoman. "David, wake up, it works. It actually works." He sat up, groggy but alert. "What works?" "Compound 47. The mechanism I've been developing for targeting cancer stem cells." "David, this isn't just another treatment. This could cure cancer." I'll never forget the look in his eyes at that moment. I thought it was excitement, pride, love. Now I know it was calculation. "Are you sure?" he asked, suddenly very awake. "The data is clear. We need to run more trials, of course, but David, this could change everything. We could save millions of lives." He pulled me into his arms, and I felt like the luckiest woman alive. "I'm so proud of you, Gloria. We're going to change the world." That was the last honest moment of our marriage. Over the following months, as we prepared for clinical trials, I noticed small changes in David's behavior. He became intensely interested in the technical details of my research, asking questions about methodologies and molecular structures that had never concerned him before. He started attending my lab meetings, taking detailed notes. "I want to understand your work better," he explained when I asked about his sudden scientific curiosity. "If I'm going to help bring this to market, I need to speak the language." I was touched. Here was my husband, making an effort to bridge the gap between our worlds. I started explaining everything in even greater detail, walking him through every step of my process, every breakthrough, every setback. I was training my replacement and didn't even know it. The red flags started appearing in our personal life first. David became distant, distracted. He started working late more often, claiming investor meetings and regulatory consultations. When I suggested we celebrate our anniversary with a trip to Napa, he said he was too busy with Gloria's project to take time off. That phrase should have been my first warning. Gloria's project, not our project, not Compound 47, but something that belonged to me alone, something separate from him. Then came the lawyers. David explained that as we prepared for clinical trials, we needed to solidify our intellectual property protections. Patent applications, corporate structures, FDA preliminary discussions, it all sounded reasonable. I need you to sign these documents, he said one evening, sliding a stack of papers across our kitchen table. It's just formalization of the patent applications and corporate ownership structures. I trusted him completely. I signed everything he put in front of me without reading the fine print. After all, we were married. We were partners. What was mine was his, and what was his was mine. That was my biggest mistake. The documents I signed transferred all intellectual property rights for Compound 47 exclusively to David. They also included a non-compete clause that would prevent me from working on similar research for 5 years if I ever left Biolux. Most devastatingly, they contained language that defined my role as a contractor rather than a partner, despite the fact that I had been developing this compound since before Biolux existed. I had just signed away 15 years of my life's work. But I didn't know that yet. The betrayal began on a Monday morning in September. I arrived at our lab, the lab I had designed, equipped, and operated for over a decade, to find my key card no longer worked. I stood at the door, swiping again and again, assuming it was a system error. Security guard Mike, who had watched me work late countless nights, approached with an uncomfortable expression. Gloria Martinez. Mr. Harris asked me to tell you that he needs to see you in his office immediately. I found David sitting behind his desk in a suit I didn't recognize, looking like a stranger. Gone was the warm partner who had celebrated my breakthroughs. In his place sat a cold businessman who couldn't meet my eyes. Gloria, we need to talk. What's going on with my lab access? I asked, still thinking this was some kind of administrative mix-up. That's what we need to discuss. I've been reviewing our research operations and corporate structure with our legal team, and we've identified some serious issues. My blood ran cold. What kind of issues? David opened a folder and slid a document across his desk. It was a formal letter, written in legal language, but the meaning was clear. I was being terminated from Biolux Pharmaceuticals, effective immediately. I don't understand, I whispered, staring at the paper that was destroying my world. David, this is my research. This is my lab. This is my life's work. Actually, Gloria, according to our corporate documents and intellectual property agreements, it's not. Compound 47 is owned exclusively by Biolux Pharmaceuticals. You were a contractor who helped with development. But the core intellectual property belongs to the company. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. Contractor. David, I've been working on this since before your company existed. I developed every aspect of this compound. I ran every experiment. I wrote every report. That may be your recollection. But the documentation tells a different story. He opened another folder and showed me lab reports, research notes, and experimental protocols. They all bore his name as lead researcher. My handwriting, my work, my discoveries all attributed to David Harris. This is fraud, I said, my voice shaking. Those are my notes. My experiments, my handwriting. You can't just put your name on my work. I can and I have. And if you attempt to make any public claims about the ownership of this research, you'll be in violation of the non-disclosure and non-compete agreements you signed. The legal consequences would be severe. I stared at this man I had loved for 12 years, trying to understand how he could sit there so calmly while destroying me. How long have you been planning this? Does it matter? Yes, it matters. I'm your wife, David. I trusted you with everything. For just a moment, his corporate facade cracked, and I saw something that might have been guilt. Gloria, you're brilliant. But you're not business-minded. You would have given this compound away to the first humanitarian organization that asked. Do you have any idea how much money we're talking about? This isn't just about saving lives anymore. This is about building an empire. So you stole my life's work to build your empire. I protected valuable intellectual property and ensured it would be developed properly. You'll be compensated fairly as a contractor who contributed to the project. He slid a check across the desk. It was for $50,000. 15 years of work. A compound that could cure cancer. The sum total of my professional life. $50,000. This is what you think I'm worth? I asked, holding the check with trembling fingers. It's generous compensation for contract work. Most pharmaceutical companies wouldn't offer anything. I stood up slowly, my legs barely supporting me. Everything I had worked for, everything I had believed about my marriage, my career, my future, it was all gone. I was being erased from my own story. Gloria, David said as I reached the door. I want you to know that this isn't personal. You're a talented researcher. I'm sure you'll find other opportunities. I turned back to look at him one last time. Other opportunities. David, you made me sign a non-compete agreement. I can't work in pharmaceutical research for 5 years. You didn't just fire me. You destroyed my career. That was a necessary business protection. No, I said quietly. That was revenge for being smarter than you. I walked out of Biolux Pharmaceuticals for the last time, carrying nothing but my purse, and the weight of complete betrayal. But David had underestimated me in one crucial way. He thought I was just a brilliant but naive scientist who trusted too easily. He was wrong about the trusting part. I had been keeping detailed backup records of my research for years, stored in a place he would never think to look. The next 6 months were the darkest of my life. Word traveled fast in the pharmaceutical community that I had been terminated from my own research project. David's version of events, that I had been a junior researcher who had gotten too attached to a project that was never really mine, became the accepted narrative. Job applications were rejected without explanation. Research positions I was overqualified for suddenly weren't available. The non-compete clause made it legally impossible for me to continue my work elsewhere, and David made sure everyone in the industry knew about it. I was blacklisted, professionally destroyed, and financially devastated. David had filed for divorce immediately after firing me, claiming irreconcilable differences and seeking to protect Biolux's assets from any community property claims. Our house, our investments, our shared life, all of it was tied up in legal proceedings that his expensive lawyers were designed to outlast my rapidly dwindling resources. I moved into a studio apartment in a neighborhood I couldn't afford, surviving on the $50,000 severance that was meant to compensate me for inventing a cure for cancer. I spent my days applying for jobs I wouldn't get, and my nights staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of my marriage, and wondering how I could have been so blind. The worst part wasn't the financial ruin, or even the professional destruction. It was watching David become everything I had dreamed we would be together. Clinical trials for Compound 47, now renamed David Arcs, were progressing faster than I had ever imagined possible. David appeared on magazine covers as the pharmaceutical visionary who could end cancer. He gave TED Talks about innovation and perseverance. He was interviewed on national television about the breakthrough that would change medicine forever. My work, my research, my life's purpose, and he was getting all the credit. The breaking point came when I saw him on 60 Minutes, sitting in the exact same lab where I had spent 15 years of my life, explaining his research methodology with the kind of casual confidence that made my blood boil. The key insight, he told the interviewer, was understanding that conventional treatments were targeting the wrong cells. I realized we needed to focus on cancer stem cells, the cells that other researchers had overlooked. I threw my remote control at the television screen. But as I sat in my empty apartment, surrounded by the shattered pieces of my old life, something clicked. The rage was still there, burning as hot as ever, but it was joined by something else: cold, calculating determination. David had made a mistake, in his arrogance. He had assumed that I was the type of person who would go quietly into professional oblivion. He had counted on my trusting nature, my lack of business acumen, my tendency to focus on the science rather than the politics. He was wrong. I had spent my entire career documenting everything meticulously. Every experiment, every breakthrough, every failure, I recorded it all with the obsessive detail of a true researcher. And while David had access to my official lab records, he had forgotten about my personal documentation. For 15 years, I had been keeping duplicate records of my research in composition notebooks that I filled out by hand every single day. Every hypothesis, every experimental design, every result, every analysis, all in my own handwriting, with dates, times, and detailed observations that no forger could replicate. I had dozens of these notebooks, chronicling every step of Compound 47's development, stored in a safety deposit box that David didn't even know existed. But I had more than just notebooks. I had video records. 3 years earlier, when I was developing the most critical aspects of Compound 47's mechanism, I had started recording myself in the lab, as a way to review my own techniques. Hours and hours of footage showing me developing, testing, and refining the very processes that David was now claiming as his own innovation. I had photographs of my original research notes, time-stamped and dated years before David's official versions. I had email correspondence with colleagues discussing my theories and breakthroughs, sent from my personal account, and archived with full metadata. Most importantly, I had something David couldn't possibly have known about: correspondence with Dr. Elena Vasquez at the NIH, whom I had been secretly collaborating with for years on the theoretical framework that eventually became Compound 47. David thought he had stolen my research and left me with nothing. In reality, he had built his empire on a foundation I could destroy with a phone call. But I didn't want to just destroy him. I wanted to do it publicly, dramatically, and in a way that would restore my reputation, while ensuring he faced the full legal consequences of his fraud. I spent the next 6 months planning my comeback, with the same methodical precision I had once applied to curing cancer. First, I contacted Dr. Vasquez at the NIH and arranged to provide her with my complete documentation of Compound 47's development. She was stunned to learn what had happened to me, and immediately began an internal investigation into David's patent claims. Second, I reached out to investigative journalist Sarah Chen at the Washington Post, who had written extensively about fraud in the pharmaceutical industry. I provided her with a preview of my evidence and asked her to begin researching David's claims. Third, I hired patent attorney Rebecca Morrison, using the last of my savings to file a formal challenge to David's intellectual property claims. But my masterstroke was much simpler and more devastating than any legal proceeding. I submitted a proposal to speak at the American Association for Cancer Research's annual conference, the most prestigious gathering of oncology researchers in the world. My proposed talk was titled, Compound 47: A 15-Year Journey from Hypothesis to Clinical Success. The conference organizers, seeing an opportunity to hear from someone with inside knowledge of the breakthrough treatment everyone was talking about, accepted my proposal immediately. David would be giving the keynote address at the same conference, accepting a Lifetime Achievement Award for his contributions to cancer research. He had no idea I would be there. The day of my presentation arrived on a sunny Thursday in April. I sat in the back of the convention center auditorium, wearing my best suit and carrying a folder that contained 15 years of meticulous documentation. My hands weren't shaking anymore. After months of planning, I felt nothing but calm determination. David's keynote was scheduled for 10 a.m., my presentation was at 2 p.m. I watched from the audience as my former husband took the stage to thunderous applause. He looked confident, polished, successful, everything I had once been proud to help him become. The irony wasn't lost on me that his moment of greatest triumph was built entirely on my work. 5 years ago, David began, his voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium. I had a theory about cancer stem cells that went against conventional wisdom. While other researchers focused on bulk tumor cells, I believed the key to a cure lay in understanding the small population of stem cells that drive tumor growth and resistance to treatment. I watched him present my research as his own, using slides that contained my data, my graphs, my conclusions. Every word he spoke was a theft from my life's work. But I let him finish. I let him accept his standing ovation. I let him bask in the glory that should have been mine. Because in 4 hours, I was going to take it all back. At 2 p.m., I walked onto that same stage, and the murmur that went through the audience told me that word had spread about who I was. Dr. Gloria Martinez, the mysterious researcher who had supposedly worked on Compound 47 before being terminated from Biolux. Good afternoon, I began, my voice steady and clear. My name is Dr. Gloria Martinez, and I want to tell you the real story of how Compound 47 was developed. I opened my folder and began methodically presenting my evidence. My original handwritten notebooks, with pages I held up to the camera so everyone could see my distinctive handwriting, and the dates that preceded David's official research by years. Video footage of me in the lab, explaining the exact methodologies that David had claimed as his innovations just hours earlier. The audience was completely silent, transfixed by what they were witnessing. This is my email to Dr. Elena Vasquez at the NIH, dated March 15, 2019, in which I describe the theoretical framework that Mr. Harris presented as his breakthrough insight this morning. Dr. Vasquez, who is here in the audience today, can confirm the authenticity of this correspondence. I saw Dr. Vasquez stand up in the audience and nod gravely. These are photographs of my original research notes, taken in 2020 and stored in a safety deposit box with verified timestamps. You can compare the handwriting to any documents bearing my signature. I methodically presented piece after piece of evidence, building an unshakable case that Compound 47 was entirely my creation. With each revelation, I could see the audience's shock growing. But my final piece of evidence was the most damning of all. Last week, I submitted this research portfolio to the FDA's Office of Scientific Integrity. They have confirmed that the methodologies, molecular structures, and experimental protocols I developed between 2008 and 2023 are identical to those currently being used in clinical trials for David Arx. I paused, letting that sink in. The FDA has also confirmed that Mr. Harris's patent applications contain fraudulent authorship claims and falsified research dates. Federal investigators are now reviewing his entire research portfolio for additional instances of intellectual property theft. The auditorium erupted. Researchers were standing, talking excitedly, pointing at the screen where my evidence was still displayed. I saw conference organizers huddled together, making frantic phone calls. In conclusion, I said, raising my voice to be heard over the commotion, I want to be clear that Compound 47 represents 15 years of my life's work. Every breakthrough, every insight, every innovation that Mr. Harris described this morning originated in my research. I developed this compound not for personal glory or financial gain, but because I believed it could save lives. I closed my folder and looked directly into the camera that was broadcasting my presentation live to researchers around the world. Mr. Harris stole my work and tried to erase me from my own story, but the truth has a way of surviving, even when people try to bury it. Thank you. The applause was deafening, but I barely heard it. I was already walking off the stage, knowing that my work here was done. Within hours, the video of my presentation was viral in the scientific community. Justice for Gloria was trending on social media, research institutions, medical journals, and pharmaceutical companies were issuing statements distancing themselves from David and his fraudulent claims. More importantly, federal investigators were taking action. The FDA's Office of Criminal Investigations launched a formal probe into David's patent fraud. The Department of Justice opened a case for wire fraud, mail fraud, and theft of intellectual property. The Securities and Exchange Commission began investigating whether his misrepresentations to investors constituted securities fraud. David's empire crumbled in a matter of days. Biolux Pharmaceuticals' stock price collapsed when the fraud allegations became public. Clinical trials for David Arx were suspended pending verification of the research data. David's book deal was cancelled, his speaking engagements were revoked, and his professional reputation was destroyed beyond repair. But the most satisfying moment came 2 weeks later, when FBI agents arrested David at his office on federal fraud charges. I wasn't there to see it, but Sarah Chen's article in the Washington Post included a photograph of him being led away in handcuffs, looking nothing like the confident pharmaceutical visionary who had stolen my life's work. The legal proceedings took 18 months, but the outcome was never in doubt. David pleaded guilty to multiple federal charges, rather than face the overwhelming evidence against him. He was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $15.2 million in restitution. More importantly, all patents for Compound 47 were officially transferred back to me, along with ownership of the research data, clinical trial results, and future licensing rights. I had won, completely and decisively. But victory felt different than I had imagined. As I sat in my new office, the head of research position at Massachusetts General Hospital, that had been offered to me after my story went public, I realized that getting justice hadn't been about defeating David. It had been about reclaiming my own story. Today, Compound 47 is in phase 3 clinical trials, showing even better results than I had originally hoped. When it reaches the market, it will carry my name as its inventor, and the profits will fund my new research foundation, focused on making breakthrough treatments accessible to underserved communities. David is in federal prison, serving his sentence and facing additional civil lawsuits from investors and former partners. His name has been removed from medical textbooks, and his research awards have been revoked. But I don't think about him much anymore. I think about the cancer patients who will benefit from 15 years of work that almost disappeared into someone else's lies. I think about the young researchers who reach out to me, inspired by my story to stand up for their own intellectual property. Most of all, I think about the lesson that took me too long to learn: trust is earned through consistent actions, not just loving words, and when someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. My research was stolen from me once. It will never happen again. Because now I know that the most powerful weapon against betrayal isn't revenge, it's preparation. And the most satisfying victory isn't destroying your enemy. It's proving that they never had the power to destroy you in the first place. The truth always survives. Sometimes it just takes a safety deposit box and a very patient scientist to set it free. Did you like this story of scientific justice? Tell us in the comments which city you're listening from. If you enjoyed Gloria's incredible journey from betrayal to triumph, please support us with a super thanks, so we can continue bringing you more stories of brilliant women who refuse to stay silent. Thank you so much for your support. We look forward to your comments about Gloria's amazing transformation. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that we highly recommend. There's so much more content on our channel, don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story, with love and respect.